Good afternoon, I'm Jacob Music, and this is The Word. Today, conservative critique of the Voting Rights Act echoes the Reconstruction era. But first, some headlines followed by Annika Wolf. Charlie Sheen has posted pictures of his new girlfriends on the internet, labeling them his angels. The three women are porn stars and were depicted topless in the photos. They are reportedly living with the star. In 2011, Charlie Sheen garnered infamy for his cohabitation with women he labeled his porn family. This came at a period when Sheen's alleged narcotic use had apparently led to his increasingly bizarre and rancorous public persona. After starring in a pornographic film with James Dean, Teen Mom star Farrah Abramson has posed for the corpse fetish magazine, Girls and Corpses. Abramson is recently out of rehab and has said that she desires to disassociate herself with her past as a reality star on MTV. After the photo shoot, Miss Abramson stated, "Girls and Corpses is one of the best magazine shoots I have ever been part of. The issue will go on sale December 1st. A Florida woman has been arrested on suspicion of biting her 16-year-old daughter's breast during a conflict. The dispute was over the collection of Social Security checks. The girl's mother apparently bit her hard enough to draw blood, which was used as evidence by the police once the mother was arrested. According to the suspect, she bit her daughter because she is never home, and the mother is tasked with watching the 16-year-old's baby." Whitney Houston's infamous daughter, Bobby Christina, will appear on the UK television show Celebrity Big Brother. The newly minted star, who only ascended to the international stage largely after the death of her mother, will appear on the show's upcoming 12th season. It has been running on the British Channel 5 since 2001. The price of the hard commodity gold has fallen 1% today, as the fiat currencies of the dollar and pound gathered strength in relation to physical assets. Since the onset of the recession revealed the weaknesses of the central bank-fueled fiat currencies, gold and other physicals were seen as safe havens by some investors. Gold futures projections have also fallen in response to this economic data. This price decrease was also exacerbated by automated trading systems. Bullion dealer Ross Norman has stated that gold has now fallen below the level of psychological support. Gold has devalued 25% this year to date due to speculation on the actions of the United States Federal Reserve. In other commodity prices, silver is down 0.1%, platinum down 0.9%, and palladium down 0.7%. American Eagle is facing difficult times as its stock plunges 16% recently. The young adult clothing retailer, which is a downscale competitor to Abercrombie & Fitch among others, has expressed difficulty in selling its summer merchandise. A number of analysts have cut their price estimates for the stock. American Eagle in-store sales are expected to fall 7% this quarter. "We are not happy at all with our second quarter results," said American Eagle CEO Robert Hansen. Traders have warned that American Eagle's woes sets a negative tone for teen retail in general. Following the break, Annika Wolf and our first story. Welcome back to The Word. We have a lot to talk about today, so we should get right into it. With me today, I have The Word regular contributor, calling in from Florida, Annika Wolf. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you very much for coming on to the show today.
Anytime.
And I have a new panelist, my good friend Charlotte. She is a student at UMBC calling from Severna Park, Maryland. How are you today?
Great, Jacob. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on. Okay, so Annika, you have your latest in bizarre and wacky news, right?
I do.
So what do you have for us today?
I know. Well, I know that you love your pets dearly.
My what?
And your pets.
Oh, I do, yes.
Oh, you do. I am the same way with all of my little rescue babies.
Mm-hmm.
So, I have an interesting story. The question is, would you choose your significant other or spouse over your furry friend? No. Well, exactly. Graham Ainsley has his priority, and he's from South Africa.
Yes.
And he was sailing with his wife to Madagascar when they hit a reef on August 4th, and they started to sink.
Oh, no!
Now, yes. Now, I would do the same thing.
Yeah, I was going to say Charlotte would probably do the same thing.
Absolutely. If there was a kid around, that's just my priority.
So what happened to the spouse?
I would say to my child first. Also have an ex-spouse for a reason. And the dog was in her own specially tailored life jacket. She was very prepared.
What's awesome about this is that there are now doggy life vests.
Oh, yeah, there's doggy everything. There's something called doggles, which are glasses for dogs for people that keep them in the car. No, I'm serious. So if you have your car, your dog's in a car with a tent out the window or on a motorcycle.
Oh, my God.
Protected eyes. They have physical therapy. They have acupuncture.
Well, they have Gucci clothes for dogs, too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. The top designers are all doing it because they know that people, celebrities, and people that can afford it will buy it.
Like me. Okay,
like
so let's move on.
$7 billion, Jacob, is what people spend on their pets each year.
What?
$7 billion.
$7 billion?
I just read that because they have insurance and then the jewelry and the clothes and the pet care and operations now.
See, what do you guys...
People, they even have fingernail polish.
Okay.
Yeah, well, claw polish.
So what do you guys think of the pet insurance? Would you ever buy into that?
If I had a puppy, I would, I'm very that I do, but mine is special needs, so she has pre-existing conditions that would never allow it.
Yeah.
But if I had a healthy dog, I would very strongly consider it.
But the real question would be, would your dog insurance policy cover the monthly cost of your dog's nail polish?
No, no, of course not. That's never going to be covered.
But so what is the next story that you have?
Jacob, it's a subject dear to your heart. It's about beauty pageants. Oh, gosh. It better not be about Honey Boo Boo. No, it is not. This is about an 18-year-old in Utah. She was recently crowned Miss Riverton after wowing the judges on the piano.
Okay.
And she has a little bit more sinister of a talent. She likes to cook up homemade bombs and throw them from her car. Oh, my gosh. She was finally arrested with 3 others on Saturday for throwing these explosives in neighborhoods at least 9 times. They admitted to buying plastic bottles, aluminum foil, and household chemicals before assembling the device. They were throwing them not just at property, but at people.
I should laugh at that.
Thank God no one was injured. And what was she crowned? Miss Liberty? She was crowned Miss Riverton. Oh, Riverton. Oh, okay.
What does...
Yeah, and looking at her picture, I don't know how that happened.
Was there a motive?
Not yet. I mean...
It was just kind of her...
They said that they were pranking. They said they were pranking.
That's not a prank, though.
Well, that's a little more dangerous than, toilet papering someone's tree or home.
Yeah, that's
and
extreme.
the devices would basically spew caustic chemicals and shrapnel.
What?
Yeah, and they can do a great deal of property. They could sever limbs and kill people according to...
Maybe
she even said, you don't have to look a certain way. It's about being healthy and happy. That's what she said.
And you know what? If creating and throwing bombs makes you happy, then you know what? Then no, I'm joking, but
no, then you're fucked up and need to see a psychiatrist.
But I'm wondering if she used that scholarship to take classes in bomb making.
Oh, there you go. And this is part of the Miss Utah. It's one of these that go up. It's part of the Miss Utah pageant.
Oh, she's probably Mormon.
It's the Salt Lake City area, so you never know. A lot going for her. She's obviously got a talent on the piano, according to, they said she wowed the judges.
Yeah.
So...
Well, these judges will buy into
she
anything.
She is pretty, you can't tell, on her jail photo, on her arrest photo.
Yeah. I just feel like...
This sounds like it could be some sort of rebellion, too, against maybe the way she's being brought up in her family. And not to criticize the Mormon state, but maybe she doesn't say.
I totally agree.
Growing up maybe in a way that's different from what she believes, and she doesn't know how to express it because she hasn't been taught to express anything other than what, was good enough for her family and good enough for her grandparents and good enough for the great-grandparents.
And that would make sense.
But she is 18 years old. She is an adult. She can make her own decisions.
She's only 18?
She's legal. She's of age.
Yeah.
They don't call it this, but this is an act of terrorism. Terrorism, it's defined. It means to inflict terror. And throwing bombs in a neighborhood, that inflicts terror on the residents.
Well,
may I say something, Jacob, about that?
Of course, and I have to add in after that.
I'm not sure if it's the same thing, but when I was about 17, I lived in a house down here in Pasadena with 6 other people, and a girl was mad at us because we took her 3-year-old away from her because she wasn't taking care of it properly. She threw a Molotov cocktail at our house, which caught on fire, and I lived on the 2nd floor. The whole thing was engulfed in flames. We lived across the street from a firehouse, and they didn't get there for 2 hours, and I had to jump out of the... I had to jump out of the 2nd story, and I was afraid to jump, and my boyfriend at the time pushed me, but I put my hands down, and my hands were all scalded and wrapped for a couple of weeks. But the weird thing is that whole house burned, and the people downstairs had a baby. All her baby things were melted, so it did a lot of damage. And the only thing left after the fire was a quarter-pound of pot and a picture of Jesus, which was by the baby's crib, which melted. And that picture of Jesus didn't. I swear, I'm not making this up. Survived. Goes to show you. This is like 40 years ago. So it wasn't considered terrorism then, but the way that Annika just described it, it's, to inflict terror on somebody. They certainly did that.
I have to say, when we're talking about terrorism, if somebody interprets something and they are terrorized by it, that is subjective. But when we define something as terrorism, we need to ask the question, is this person intending to inflict terror? And in this case, we just don't know.
I think so. Going around the neighborhood throwing bombs?
Well, but, maybe she just wasn't thinking. Maybe she just thought it was fun. Because obviously she's not very good at making decisions.
But would you consider it bullying? Because Annika, do you know how she picked her targets? Who she threw it at?
Well, I don't know. Yeah. That's bizarre. But, so I think the takeaway before we move on, the takeaway from this is beware of bomb-wielding Mormon beauty queens.
Well, we don't know if she's Mormon, so you can't say that.
Yeah, that is a wild speculation. But we need to take a break and move on. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the Voting Rights Act. This month, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 unconstitutional. We're going to discuss not only this, the Voting Rights Act in and of itself, conservative responses to it, but I thought that we needed to add historical context to this. So not only will we review the 14th and 15th Amendments, but also Reconstruction era. Were you guys taught what the Reconstruction was and what it meant in school? Because I was not really.
I never heard of it until I went to college. Took history. I knew of it, but I didn't know much because I really focused more on world history.
Yeah, me too. But there's also, after researching this a bit, there are so many facts, and it's not even a foreign country's history. It's our own history that I had no idea about. But basically, the Radical Reconstruction freed and enfranchised African Americans, men, giving them the right to vote for the first time in 1867. It was when the Radical Republicans, as they called themselves, used Congress to upgrade the rights of freed slaves. The election of 1866 enabled them to remove former Confederates from power and enfranchise freed slaves. The Radicals were upset at President Johnson, who opposed them, and they actually impeached him over this issue. They were so adamant for the upgrade in citizenship status for African American men. The Southern Democrats, who strongly opposed African American equality, alleged widespread corruption. They counterattacked and regained power in each state by 1877, which is why...
And you said the Democrats said that.
Well, yes, because at the time, before the 1960s, the Democratic Party was predominantly white, Southern, agricultural, and conservative. So it was a very different party than the one that we are talking about today.
It's like we flip-flopped. We totally flipped.
In terms
Democrat,
of
Republican.
Yeah, in terms of
their ideology and stuff. If you go back all the way to the Civil War, I mean, the person that wanted the emancipation of the slaves was Lincoln, and he was a Republican. Right. Right.
But you also see that I believe Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat, and he was the most radical in terms of emancipation, even more so than Lincoln. So, I mean, it does go both ways. But so the result of this radical reconstruction was 3 amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, which are pivotal to the civil rights and the voting rights of African Americans in the United States. And whites finally reestablished their supremacy, making the freed slaves second-class citizens by the start of the 20th century. By the 1870s, Reconstruction had officially provided freedmen with equal rights under the Constitution, and blacks were voting and taking political office. Republican legislatures, coalitions of whites and blacks, established the first public school systems in the South. Beginning in 1874, there was a rise in white paramilitary organizations, such as the White League, the Red Shirts, and the KKK. In your experiences growing up where you did you have any experience with these white supremacist organizations like the KKK?
The first time I really witnessed them and witnessed a march was when I was in D.C.
Oh.
I grew up in a black neighborhood, so I didn't see evidence of that, but I was here and born for the riots in the 60s.
Oh, really?
In Baltimore, yeah.
That's interesting.
Pretty different world.
Yes.
One day you're just a little kid, and the next day it's like, oh my gosh, people are taking sides and there's a line.
Yeah.
I hadn't grown up that way.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden there was a line. And it was around this time because I was in 2nd grade when Kennedy was killed, so Johnson became the president right after. And then the riots were in 63, I think, in Baltimore. And kids I went to elementary school with, by the time we got to middle school, they were so militant they wouldn't even be your friend. They would beat you up.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we were friends and played together, in 2nd, 3rd grade.
Yes. Amendments established the rights that through extensive litigation led to the Supreme Court rulings, of which the Voting Rights Act comes into this picture, starting in the early 20th century that struck down discriminatory state laws. So a second Reconstruction, sparked by the Civil Rights Movement, led to the civil rights laws in 64 and 65 that protected and enforced full civil rights of African Americans. So basically, let's talk about this issue of, this is sort of tangential, but this is something that I have come into contact with where I live, is this kind of phenomenon of Confederate nationalism. Some people in the South, they have what's called Southern pride, and they'll wave Confederate flags. To be honest, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but I don't, some people during the Reconstruction were saying it should be banned. I disagree, because I think banning it would give it more strength. But what do you guys believe?
See, I think it should be allowed for one reason. It's freedom of expression. Yeah. Yeah. You have to be able to express anything. I readily will accept freedom of expression, but I often do wonder when I look at a Confederate flag and the gun rack in the back of a pickup truck. I know that sounds stereotypical, but I've seen that so many times.
Yes.
And it's like, but what's the intention? See, the intention, I don't think it's the spirit of their gesture isn't just because that's what they believe. It's to offend other people, and that's what bothers me. Sometimes they just don't understand the real meaning of it, but they see it and they think
I can call BS on that. I don't believe that. I live in areas where that is normalized. Where I live, down the main drag of the street, the young kids, it is still acceptable and sanctioned to drive in your pickup truck and have Confederate flags waving from it. I know that these people are smart enough to know the cultural and political meanings of this.
You wonder, honestly, if they're educated.
These people may not be educated in terms of master's degrees or whatever, but they know. They know.
Okay. Yeah, and just like bumper stickers and everything else that people put on their cars. People do that, because I do it, to send a message. And you have to understand what your message is, or you wouldn't even bother to, decorate your car or put different things on it if you didn't want people to either, just see it to make them think.
It is social messaging, yeah. Yeah.
Right, again, unless you're doing it to fit in.
Yes. And
I know I have a couple that I did just to piss a couple people off, a certain group of people off.
The weirdest sounds are emitting from my phone. It sounds like slamming doors and pots and pans.
Yeah, I heard that. Oh, I'm just sitting here.
I have no idea what that is. But, that wasn't really I get what you're saying, and I understand he had to be politically pragmatic, but at the same time, that wasn't my question.
That's what I'm saying. He couldn't go too far too fast.
But I wasn't even... What I'm asking is listen to my question, though. Why, I didn't hear about Ulysses S. Grant's legacy at all in school. Why is Lincoln idolized by people today and Ulysses S. Grant ignored?
Because he freed the slaves.
Because he what?
That's what.
Well,
he freed the slaves.
But arguably...
To Lincoln? Yeah, so who cares about their voting or whatever? They were no longer slaves, and that's why Lincoln is idolized. But
okay.
didn't Lincoln have slaves of his own?
I have no idea.
That was no one has ever said that I know of. My history teacher at UMBC did.
Oh, really?
Really? Yeah, I'm sure I told you about him, Jacob, the tall guy.
What's his name?
Oh, I'd have to go back and look. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't remember anybody's name.
Yeah.
But that was something I had never known, and so it kind of shattered my idea of Lincoln in Washington. There was only certain presidents that were presented in school when I went to school in such a way that it was to make everybody like those people and believe that.
Over the course of this period, from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, more than 1,500 African Americans held public office in the South, going from being property, going from being slaves, to holding public office, and then by 1908, no African Americans being in office again, because Reconstruction was rolled back. Because southern states passed new constitutions and laws that disenfranchised most blacks and tens of thousands of poor whites with new voter registration and electoral rules. When establishing new requirements, these states put in place subjectively administered literacy tests and other tests. And then there's this really bizarre part of this whole saga that I wanted to discuss with Lincoln. So originally when he had freed the slaves, and he met with African American leaders, he basically said that the best thing for them would be to go move out of the country and colonize Central America. He said that although Lincoln gave assurance that the United States government would support and protect any potential black colonies, the black leaders declined the offer of colonization. President Lincoln persisted in his colonization plan, believing that emancipation and colonization were part of the same program, which I didn't know and I was never taught. He sent a few black people to Haiti, but these colonies were not able to remain self-sufficient. Frederick Douglass criticized that Lincoln was showing all his inconsistencies, his pride of race and blood, and his contempt for African Americans. In his hypocrisy. He said African Americans wanted citizen rights, to be citizens of their own country rather than be sent somewhere else and be a colony, which makes sense. And of course,
it does make sense. You got to admit, it does make sense.
Not at all. No.
Both sides of the coin.
That makes no sense at all, because what about the people...
Sure. It would make sense, because think about it this way. The free-slaves would have a community of their own, a government of their own, make them happy, and it would make all these Southerners who are still pissed off about losing the war, make them happy.
Okay.
Yeah, but you know what, Annika, when you just separated people. We're all Americans, and he said, "Oh, that will make them happy, and then that will make them happy." But it's really us. In the late 1800s, our country is very different than we. No, but the truth has been here since the beginning of time. So the truth is, we have always not been separate. We have always been us, and we have always been one. And supposedly, that was the idea. But no, that's not supposedly. That's the law of the universe. I mean, that's a spiritual law that has been in place forever. Yeah, spiritually, but we had slaves. We weren't all one.
Yeah.
Well, that was the human. They weren't even human beings. They were property.
Yeah,
right, but I'm talking about this perpetuates keeping people separate.
I get it, but my thing is, it's not like Central America was empty, okay? There were people there. I don't think that we should just go send our black people off to colonize someplace that's already
settled. I agree with that, but what I'm saying is I understand his idea.
I think his idea is not smart. I think maybe if someone thinks about it superficially, it would make sense, but that would cause major problems.
Absolutely. And no, I don't like it, but I can understand it. I mean, we just recovering from the Civil War. You don't want to go back that way when tensions are so high. That's all I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, but that Civil War was for something so important that to then agree with, I can understand it. I'm not challenging you. I'm just
I would have to defend Annika there.
I could never understand that, even if I was back in that time. But unfortunately, it is a fact of life, and that's just the way people do things.
Well, and it was a fact of this history. So basically, when the Reconstruction extended voting rights to African Americans for the first time, as you can imagine, there was a lot of discontent in the South among these white planters who had this kind of racial animus, and they were taught their whole life that black people were less worthy. So there was all these myths and these rumors that were spreading around. And one of the rumors was that the act, one of these acts offered 40 acres and a mule to every black person, and that sort of brewed this discontent. So it was sort of like the Obama phone of the Reconstruction. Why do you think that such promises of the minorities and the poor, quote, getting things, it still instills rage in many white people to this day? Go ahead, Charlotte.
Well, I'm just saying, having at the end of the war, the country was fairly devastated all over, but a lot of the white America had the means to begin again, and black people had nothing because they left somebody else's plantation, they left someone else's home, and they had nothing. So they were disadvantaged, and they did need that, which they never did get it. So sure, but I'm saying Jacob asked, why did that anger people? That's my opinion of why it angered people. I mean, they were slaves; they had nothing of their own.
Well,
I didn't know that it angered people.
Well, it angered a lot of white people.
I mean, the Southerners, but
Well,
I learned nothing in school.
Well, but my question is, why would white people have been so quick to believe these rumors?
I mean, Jacob, look at the late 1930s and 1940s. People in Germany believed that Jews had horns and a tail, and that's why Jews kept the yarmulkes on their heads.
Wow.
Okay?
Wow.
This is the 30s and 40s, the 20th century. If people can believe what people want to believe.
Yeah, that's true.
It's when something gets started and one person repeats it to another person, and eventually, it's the game of telephone. Someone can say they saw it, someone can say this. I mean, for me personally, it bothers me because, number one, it was 300 years ago. We're all equal. My family did not even come, both sides, did not even come to America until the 20th century. So it's like, why should I, of my family, have to pay for something we weren't even, in the country for? But what did you come to this country for, though? See, Jacob, what I see is that a lot of people think that black people don't work hard.
Yeah.
And, if you figure the majority of black people, and then this is their legacy to children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren are still at a disadvantage because
Indeed. Generation by generation.
Now everyone is equal. We all get the same education, K through 12. They don't have the history that we have. And then they got put in competition with other people, and they can't compete because they don't have the skills.
Yeah.
They don't even have the living skills.
Well, we're not really talking about reparations.
Sure we are. There are people still talking about reparations.
I'm sure there are. Well, there are also still people talking about, the KKK, who are in it. So, but I have to respond to, Annika, when you said that everyone's equal in this country, okay, maybe in theory, politically, but I think that is a hollow statement. It is not the same thing to be politically...
Again, you know my history. You know my family. My mother did not have the benefit of the education. She didn't know English when she came here in 1960. She does have a job where she makes less money because of it. So I'm there and I get it. But she probably got the job because she wasn't black. No, she got the job because she worked her ass off. Believe me, there was plenty of prejudice against my mother. But all back in the day that Jacob's talking about, if you remember, this is one thing I do remember from my recent history class, is that black people were categorized as 4/5 of a person.
3/5.
And that idea has lived on till now, though.
It is in our Constitution.
The KKK kind of people and whatever. So, but Jacob's talking about now, about why white people now.
Well,
because that idea has lived on. It was a very strong idea.
Yeah.
It was, things like that don't just die when 300 years later. When is it going to end?
But it's not about reparations. What it's about is having a civil society in which we care for each other, in a sense.
Right. Yeah, but, come on. I have been a victim of racism before, based on, my religion.
Sure, but you were never considered 3/5 of a person.
I don't believe that anymore. Not in the 20th century.
But see, the slate does not wipe clean. You have to realize that wealth is an experience, social connections, they are all passed on generation from generation. And, taken...
we have a black president.
Okay, but again, that is a token. Is he representative of the black experience as a whole? I don't know about that. I mean, he is a token.
Look at the circumstances of the time.
He is a token.
I think a lot of people wanted a black president. It's a big part of it.
So we need to move on. So the debate over Reconstruction was nationwide. This 1866, there's this, election poster that I have a picture of that alleged that, the government kept the Negro in idleness at the expense of the hardworking white taxpayer. And it depicts a racist caricature of African Americans. So this current of thought still holds and is actually quite strong in white conservative circles today. Why?
Who knows why anybody does anything, let's face it.
Well, that's a cop-out answer.
Because people are acting from their ego. They want to protect what's theirs.
Indeed.
And making sure their kids are going to get it, and they don't care about anyone else.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. Everyone is about what...
Just because somebody works hard does not mean that they cannot be privileged.
Well, it doesn't mean that they cannot share either. Obamacare has nothing to that.
Well, we're not talking about Obamacare. We need to focus.
Anyways, that's a debate for another day.
Indeed it is.
I think there's a lot more contempt for Latinos these days.
Oh, I would agree, actually. Yeah.
We just switched our...
So, in terms of the legislation that led up to the Voting Rights Act, so there was the Enforcement Acts, which were 3 bills passed by the United States Congress between 1870 and 1871. They were criminal codes which protected blacks' right to vote, to hold office, and receive equal protection of laws. The laws also allowed the federal government to intervene when states did not act. So the main again, I hear like things falling. No one hears that? So the main target of these laws was the Ku Klux Klan. And it was actually only when the Enforcement Acts were put in place by Washington did the lynching start to become a very popular form of sort of white rage expression, really. In the act, the government banned the use of terror, force, or bribery to prevent people from voting because of their race. Other laws that were passed at this time banned the KKK entirely. So should groups like the KKK be banned?
No, freedom of expression.
Indeed, but back in the day, the KKK actually was a paramilitary organization. They actually killed people. So as a matter of principle, then, even if citizens groups come together and plot assassinations, they should not be banned?
Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with you guys, because I am a civil libertarian, but at the same time, that really kind of worries me, but then again, I don't know. And it's not the 1860s anymore, but I think back in the day, if we would have been having this conversation in the 1860s, I think I would have said, yeah, these people need to be banned and cracked down on.
They had a lot more, what do you call this, like people get deputized to go off and just do things and citizen arrests and, people were more rogue back then.
I mean, if I knew somebody back then, if I knew people who were being killed, I would probably feel more strongly about this, But so then, it's two pivotal amendments to the Constitution that paved the way for the Voting Rights Act was the 14th Amendment, which addressed citizens' rights and equal protection of the laws. The amendment was bitterly contested, especially by southern states, predictably, which were actually forced to ratify it in order for them to regain representation in Congress. The 14th Amendment, particularly its first section, is one of the most litigated parts of the Constitution, forming the basis for landmark decisions such as Roe v. Wade regarding abortion and Bush v. Gore regarding the 2000 election. It overruled Dred Scott versus Sanford, which had held that Americans descended from African slaves could not be citizens, so it overruled that. The Due Process Clause prohibits states and local governments officials from depriving persons of life, liberty, or property without legislative authority. This clause was also the basis for Brown v. Board of Education, so it is, super important for the basis of civil rights legislation in this country and precipitated the dismantling of racial segregation. In terms of the 15th Amendment, that prohibited the federal and state governments from denying a citizen the right to vote based on that citizen's race, color, or previous condition of slavery. It was the third and last of the Reconstruction Amendments. It was kind of the narrow election of Ulysses S. Grant to the presidency convinced a majority of Republicans that protecting the franchise of black voters was important. However, by 1910, most black voters in the South faced obstacles such as poll taxes and literacy tests from which white voters were exempt. There was also a system of whites-only primaries in the South, which I did not know.
Also, to be fair, those tests were also not fair because some of them weren't even literacy. They would show them a bar of soap, and they would say, "What is this?" And they would say, "Soap," and then they'd say, "No, that's wrong. You can't vote."
What?
Right. Yeah, I saw that on a video in school.
Oh my God! See, I didn't even know about that. That's awful.
Yeah.
Awful. So this struck down grandfather clauses and dismantled the white primary system in Texas. And then, it coupled with the 24th Amendment, which forbade poll taxes in federal elections. These decisions significantly increased black participation in the American political system, which finally brings us to, there's a lot of precedent here, and really, you can see that these three Reconstruction Amendments were important, but by 1908, these southern states had sort of re-segregated themselves, and Jim Crow racial regime was in place. So they had basically redone the work that was needed to, exclude black people from public life. So in a way, by 1908, 1910, it was almost like these were null and void, And that's why there was this second Reconstruction, or the vote, or the Civil Rights movement was needed. And so, when we come to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it prohibits discrimination in voting. Echoing the language of the 15th Amendment, the act prohibits state and local governments from imposing any, quote, voter qualification or prerequisite to voting, or standard practice or procedure to deny or abridge the right of any citizen the practice of requiring otherwise qualified voters to pass literacy tests in order to register to vote, a principal means by which southern states had prevented African Americans from exercising the franchise. The act established governments with a history of discriminatory voting practices could not implement any change in affecting voting without first obtaining the approval of the Department of Justice. A process called preclearance, which was the specific part of the Voting Rights Act which was declared unconstitutional this year. Conservative legislatures during the 2006 extension of this Voting Rights Act opposed requiring states with large Spanish-speaking populations to provide bilingual ballots. This year, in the court case Shelby County versus Eric Holder, the United States Supreme Court struck down Section B of the Act, which contains the coverage formula that determines which state and local jurisdictions are subject to this preclearance.
I have a big issue with, a big one. I'm sorry, but I think if you don't speak English, you don't necessarily get to vote. Because if you put it in one language, the ballot, then you should put it in every language that there are citizens. Because by putting it in one language over another...
Well, it has specific metrics.
That shows bias. Just because there may be a minority in that area of one race, that minority still...
But it's not speaking about race.
And again, getting back to being one, there's only one race. There's one race, that's the human race. And some of them speak English and some people don't.
And I don't...
But I'm saying if you cater to one group by putting a certain language on, this is America, we're the melting pot. We've got to do everybody.
Well, no.
And we can maintain our individuality. So, like a salad, like I could be a carrot, you could be a radish. But we're not a melting pot, we're not blending into each other. I guess my point is, if that's the case, and you're going to provide dressing for a radish, you should provide the dressing the carrot like. There aren't.
What do you mean, no, there aren't?
Frederick County, Maryland, they recently passed a law that said they're an English-only county, and the government will not spend money on printing any kind of forms in both languages unless it has to do with health or safety. If we're one country, then we need to act like one country and not say, yeah, but I speak.
But I don't think that using languages other than English says that we're not one country. See, I have to fundamentally disagree with you because I think that this would disenfranchise large swaths of people who are new citizens.
There's a responsibility of the government of the United States of America to provide opportunities, ways for people to be equal. But it's also up to the individual. That doesn't mean they have to speak the same language as I do. A lot of people kind of think that things are going to be provided to and for them.
I think that's a trope used against minorities in the polls. I think it's enough if you go out there in whatever language and you research and you make an informed choice as a voter and exercise your right to vote.
That's what I mean. That's their own individual responsibility.
But I don't. Yes, but
like you said, you need to research.
Indeed, but that doesn't mean you have to research and vote in English.
Well, you need to vote in the language provided to you.
See, but you know what? If somebody no, I mean, if I was provided,
that's fine. But why should your tax dollars provide that? Because it's another American.
Because the person's a citizen, and they deserve the right to vote with the same access that you'd have.
We're paying them tons of money for ourselves to have polls and poll keepers and poll counters and the little guards that help you. That's just to make sure that ballots are beat. But if it's the whole... Wait. If it's the issue of voting, you can't separate out the people. It's like, whatever it is, it's not about people and separating people out. It's the issue of voting and making it fair and accessible to everybody.
Indeed.
And so if it costs $100,000, so fucking what? It's divided up. Not going to allow for it. The state budget is what does all of that. Well, so what issue is accessibility to voting? You can't separate people and their needs. What about handicapped people? No, Annika, I have to so disagree agree with you.
I
what
do
about
as well.
handicapped people? Look at all the money I'm spending on my tax dollars, and I'm not begrudging it at all, so that they can get their wheelchair in there to vote. Well, I know, but you can't discuss that
no.
No, you can't discuss it, Annika, in isolation. Because
Indeed.
Answer my question then. No. Well, answer my question. Look at the money that the taxpayers of state and federal and local counties have paid to make voting accessible to handicapped people in wheelchairs and blind people that have to have Braille and all that other stuff. Do you begrudge them the accessibility? I'm disabled, so absolutely not.
I feel like you're avoiding this, though.
No, it's not an apple and an orange. You know, this Voter Rights Act, which is unconstitutional.
I must interject here.
In the context of this act, which is what this is about.
Hello.
You know, what we're doing.
I must speak.
In the context of this act.
Please listen.
Something different.
See, please listen. I must interject that only Section 4B is unconstitutional, not the entire act.
Right.
So this language provision is not unconstitutional, and it does still stand. Our governments, no matter what level they are, we can argue about it, they should represent the people and be accessible to the people that live in those districts.
And I absolutely 100% agree with you. Okay? And what this bill is saying is it's saying that for the presidential and vice presidential election, that is what is required.
Well, I feel like your argument kind of shifted, because earlier you were talking about with the language provisions that if you were providing it for one group, you should do it in all groups or all languages.
Okay, I got off topic then. That it was my
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So the
It's
argument.
not even about the language at this point. It's about preventing people from voting.
Hello.
And
Okay.
they said because the Democrats want to cheat. That's what the article said.
If I
the Democrats
could-
want to cheat.
Hello.
Republican,
Yes, please. Hello. Hola. Hello. Can anybody hear me? Okay. Rein it back in. I think the argument is that I have heard is that a lot of people in the city and a lot of minorities have never had to have an ID or a driver's license because what we use as our ID a lot of times is a driver's license. But if you live in the city, you don't need a driver's license.
But wait, Jacob, you don't even show that. That's what I'm saying is I've been voting. I'm almost 60. I've been voting for 40 years?
Yes.
I've never shown anything. I walk up and I tell them my name and my address. And they look me up and they say, go vote.
So that's,
you're supposed to. They just don't always enforce it. No, you're not supposed to. It's not a law. That's why everyone's up in arms, because that's one of the things in this voting thing that they're trying to do by dismantling the Voting Act of 1965. And if they can dismantle that, then they can add everybody needs a photo ID. Well, you've never needed one before, so why do you need one now? And limit their access if they have to have a photo ID, because maybe they don't have the $20 to go to DMV and get one of those non-driving license IDs. Or exactly. Yeah, because you don't want people from another country coming in droves to, alter the vote. I'm assuming that's what they're talking about.
But it's like if you're from another country, you wouldn't even be on the rolls.
But you can go from state to state. So if you have, that you can have... No, because it's smart that you vote. You can't go from state to state and vote 5 times for the president.
Actually, the Voting Rights Act, well, it says that you can vote in a different state. But, you can't vote multiple times, obviously, but...
They use dead people. They say that dead people voted. I don't know how to do that, but...
So one of the most important provisions in the Voting Rights Act was added in 1982. It was an amendment that provided that proof of intentional discrimination is not required for the Voting Rights Act to be violated. So the provision focused instead on whether the electoral processes are equally accessible to minority voters. This section is permanent and does not require renewal. I think this 1982 amendment, obviously I'm not an expert, but in my interpretation of it, this 1982 amendment would really null and void any opposition to the language. I don't know.
They never defined boring stuff. That's the chronic problem with government.
Well, no, it's not a problem. It's actually an advantage. And the reason it's an advantage is having language that is not strictly defined allows the Supreme Court to interpret these on whether, in the context of constitutionality. That is the flexibility of our law.
We need so much of that.
Pardon?
I mean, I've been a victim of stuff because of the non-definition.
But what I'm saying is that is unfortunate, but it is necessary because we need to have that flexibility in our law to look at it through the lens of our Constitution, our judges, and our legal system.
Right.
But let's talk about the specific provision that was challenged and ruled unconstitutional, which is the issue of preclearance. To preclear any attempt to, this section 5 says that you must preclear any attempt to change any voter qualifications or prerequisite to voting or standard practice or procedure with respect to voting in any covered jurisdiction. So it says, yes, in any, covered jurisdictions are jurisdictions that fall within Section 4B, which would say ones that have legacies of racism.
There are 8 specific states that this really used to apply to, and I guess does.
Yeah.
And there's South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama,
Florida, Texas, Virginia.
Mississippi, no, not even.
New Hampshire.
Louisiana, Texas, and Virginia. And parts of North Carolina, Arizona, Alaska, and Hawaii. I looked it up. Not all the South, like not Florida and things like that. Only certain states in the South. Kind of weird.
I could have sworn that Florida was. Oh yeah, only some counties of Florida, not all of Florida. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
But not too many counties.
Because I'm looking at the map here, and you're right. It's not all of Florida. And then there's these sort of odds and ends, like most of New Hampshire for a while before it bailed out was also included in the coverage formula.
Alaska and Hawaii and Arizona also are in there.
As of January.
Who would think of Alaska and Hawaii?
Well, no. Well, I don't know. Well, Hawaii, for my information, as of January 2008, Hawaii is not included in the coverage, but I don't know.
Oh, okay.
But you're right when you talk about Alaska.
Yeah.
Alaska is, but it said that. So basically, Section 4B must, under that, the Attorney General must demonstrate that a proposed voting change does not have the purpose and will not have the effect of discriminating based on race or color. In some cases, they must also show that the proposed change does not have the purpose or effect of discriminating against a language minority group. Membership in a language minority group includes, so it is defined, persons who are American Indian, Asian American, Alaskan natives, or of Spanish heritage. The burden of proof in this Section 5 is on the covered jurisdiction to establish that the proposed change does not have a retrogressive purpose. Some counties and towns have been found in violation of Section 2 since this act was passed and were placed into the coverage. But of course, the reason we're even talking about this is on June 25th, 2013, the Supreme Court case of Shelby versus Eric Holder held that the pre-clearance coverage formula in Section B was unconstitutional. No jurisdiction is currently required to have any of their voting changes pre-cleared now. So in my response to this is, it is interesting that this case is litigated now, both because it is coming in at the same time as increased minority populations were thought to have contributed to an Obama victory in the election, but also because there is a flurry of voter ID, new regulations, and new reforms being passed and proposed by Republican legislatures. So what is prompting this now of all times when we have so many other issues to deal with?
The next 2016 election. That's what's prompting it. They're already, fearing that the Democrats are going to win again, thinking that that's in their strategy, that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
That they're going to counteract what the Democrats are doing.
Yes. Annika, did you want to say something?
No, I think, Charlotte nailed it on the nose.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody wants to win. They spend millions and millions of dollars trying to win.
In one of the earlier episodes, they'll do it in any way they can. You know, we talked about ridiculous redistricting here in Maryland that made no sense, and the Maryland Democratic Party only proposed it so they could have an easier time of winning. So, it goes both ways. They'll do anything they can.
You know? Like you said, both sides will do
exactly
anything they can to win.
Indeed.
Because when you're spending, $5, $10, however many $million,
sad state of affairs.
But
really.
money and currency and economics governs your life in capitalism. So,
right, but if you think about what Carl Sagan said back in the 70s, he said, don't give energy to dominant thought. So if we believe that is dominant thought, we shouldn't even entertain it, even in this conversation, although I understand how come we're doing it. Energy has the power to change dominant thought.
And I agree with you.
You don't give any power to it if you don't acknowledge it.
I agree with you, but then again, this is not a spiritual discussion.
This is context we have to kind of talk about.
Indeed, and this is not a spiritual context. We're having this in. This is more physical and political. So I get it. But here is the question. So do each of you think that pre-clearancing is unconstitutional? Do you agree with the Supreme Court?
I think that they absolutely have to go and get pre-clearance. That when they're going to change something that could potentially affect disenfranchised and minority voters.
So what you're saying is that 4B, in your opinion, is constitutional. You disagree with the Supreme Court.
Correct.
Okay.
I think constitutionally they need to clear that.
I agree. And I suspect Charlotte would agree with us too.
How many documents do people have to go vote?
Exactly. And what's interesting?
That's the key to it.
A driver's license or a state ID, you can just show a bill or something.
I've never shown anything. That's my point of all this. No, I've been voting for 40 years. Either. I've never shown anything. And so why all of a sudden they want to do this? It's because there's such a high population of Latinos and they're voting mostly Democrat. I've never had to show anything since I began voting. It's not a requirement. You don't have to have ID.
But it's interesting because, Charlotte, when you were reading that quote is from Dan Bongino, who is this candidate for something, I think, in the DMV area. And, it's funny because he's a Republican, and he's sort of his banner issue is these voter ID laws. He's a big advocate for them, and he's been on Fox News like a ton of times, and he's getting all this attention. He's vaguely not related, I don't mean by blood, but vaguely, now that my mother is a campaign manager, he's vaguely associated with her. So that's a weird kind of offshoot, but I think it's funny.
Hear that one of Obama's Secret Services just committed suicide?
What?
Yeah. Yesterday.
No, I didn't. But I also have to say, you know what? It's like, Annika, if you remember when we were talking about McCain in Syria, he knows that if he talks about a certain issue, might not even be the one that he really thinks is the most important, he is still going to get more attention that way,
Exactly. What's the old saying? No publicity is bad publicity.
Exactly. I think a lot of these politicians have that. But, okay, so after the Supreme Court did rule 4B and pre-clearancing unconstitutional, Justice Antonin Scalia drew criticism from civil rights leaders after expressing his belief during oral arguments that Congress reauthorized Section 5, not because the legislation was necessary, but because it constituted, basically he said the Voting Rights Act constituted a racial entitlement. Antonin, I don't know. I just wanted to repeat his quote, so if anybody happened to agree with him, I didn't think you guys would, but I just wanted to give you that opportunity.
The three of us all really agree.
We do. We do.
With it being repealed.
Yeah.
We're just kind of discussing
different points, and the critics, the people who were saying this is unconstitutional, were saying that the disparate treatment of the northern states and the southern states is based on 40-year-old facts having no logical
relationship to the present day and thus is not responsive to current needs. The court, when they ruled this unconstitutional, expressed that Congress cannot subject a state to preclearance based on past discrimination. And since the coverage formula was last modified in 1972, the country has changed. Why do you have to rule it unconstitutional? Just update the formula for 2013. I mean, there's no reason to throw out the entire thing, you know?
Well, but it is because you have to look at who's doing it, and you have to look at the intention behind it.
Yeah.
Before the repeal, you did not have to show ID. You're correct. You never had to show ID in the past.
Yeah, because these laws were unconstitutional. Well, against the Voting Rights Act.
You may have to show ID.
Reforms or voter ID laws, whatever you want to call them, you know, they were being passed, and none of them could be actually enforced because when they were passed, they were in violation of the Voting Rights Act. So I just find it really suspicious that sort of these were passed and then they were made constitutional. You know, I find that kind of weird.
To be very honest.
And you know what? At the end of the day, the law says the motive does not matter.
Right, but the fact is there was a motive.
So
And I'm just curious to what the motive was, and we'll never know, but I'm curious.
I completely agree. So in terms of the
Voter
justices,
suppression, that's what the motive is.
well, a lot of people believe that. So in terms of the justices on the court that said that, no, this is constitutional, of course they were in the minority, included Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan. They said that Congress, they would have held that Congress had sufficient evidence before it to determine that the coverage formula remained responsive to current needs. And throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work and stop discrimination is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. But I think one of the most interesting and probably aggressive reactions to this was our Attorney General Eric Holder. After 4B was declared unconstitutional, you know, he lost that case. He expressed disappointment with the decision, not only, but he also pledged that the Department of Justice will not hesitate to take swift enforcement action using every legal tool that remains available to us against any jurisdiction that seeks to take advantage of the Supreme Court's ruling by hindering eligible citizens' full and free exercise of the franchise. On July 25th, so only really a few days ago, Holder announced that the Department of Justice will ask a federal court to subject the formerly covered state of Texas to preclearance. Okay, so on July 25th, Holder announced that the Department of Justice will ask the federal court to bail in Texas because I guess it believes that there is a problem and Texas should be cleared, should need preclearance. Because Texas has been one of the most aggressive states in pursuing voting. And so I would ask, do you think that these statements by the Attorney General indicates that the Justice Department will take action against those states which have deigned to change voter ID registration laws? Do you expect that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So,
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't think the government is, they'll talk a good game, but they're not going to do anything.
But it's like, it's also like, I mean, I totally get where Eric Holder is coming from, but now that it's declared unconstitutional, I don't know where his legal standing is. I mean,
Exactly.
I don't know if there's anything he could do at this point.
Yeah, but there isn't anything he can't do because...
Well, I would hope that that's not the case.
He's who he is. He's in the position who he is. He has a tremendous opportunity
No, he
to make
doesn't.
a big-ass statement, and he's got to do something because otherwise...
At this point, he can say whatever, but his hands are tied. 4B has been declared unconstitutional. He can't go against the Constitution. So...
There's some serious pots and pans going on.
4B, which was declared unconstitutional, only covers the certain areas. So, I mean, the argument is just not really adding up, I don't think.
Well, you know what it is? I think here's why it's unconstitutional. I think here's their thinking. I think that's exactly the reason. Because it covers certain states.
Yeah.
I think that's why they said it's unconstitutional.
And
It needs to be the same for every state. So, do I agree? Yes, I agree that it's unconstitutional. Now I think we need to have some serious change. Legally, you can't single out one state over another.
You know, and now that is law, now that our high court has declared that. But finally, getting to this one editorial from Media Matters for America entitled 48 Years Later, Conservatives Are Making the Same Arguments Against the Voting Rights Act. Today marks it was yesterday. Yesterday marked the 48th anniversary of President Johnson signing that act into law, which I didn't know either, which is kind of cool. Conservatives are apt to defend gutting the law by arguing that our country has made significant strides in racial equality over the past 48 years. That being the case, one would hope that segregationist arguments against the Voting Rights Act would have been relegated to the dustbin of history rather than in use by conservatives today to defend discriminatory policies. You know, when I've seen the coverage in the media, they're all just talking about now or maybe the 60s, but you need to get the big picture, you know? And so it says one such tactic was to accuse the civil rights activists of aggravating racial tensions, which is not only used today against black activists like Al Sharpton, but also in the Trayvon Martin case.
Yeah, I think that, everybody's yabbering about this and nobody's looking at the big picture. It should have been struck down, but not for the reasons everyone's talking about.
And I need to, Annika, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Do I think that, am I pleased that 4B was declared unconstitutional? No. But at the same time, looking forward, we need to put in a new Voting Rights Act which covers pre-clearance should be for every state in the union.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It sucks.
It's a good thing.
A pre-clearance is a great thing, but you know what? It sucks that, now there is no pre-clearance for anybody in the union because this was declared unconstitutional. Not the legal argument was sound because, as Annika said, for some reason, no one was making this argument, but we need to look forward and we need to I think our lawmakers should press forward to have national pre-clearance soon before this becomes the next election and becomes an issue.
Exactly. Again, it's very hard timing-wise to get it done that quickly.
I know, because, and it's like, it's almost like in terms of voting law for the next election, it's almost like the cat is out of the bag.
Was it 2 hours after this was enacted?
Oh, Texas wasted no. That says something right there. But it goes on to say 2 weeks ago, Bill O'Reilly told his audience that civil rights leaders want to divide the country along racial lines. I think we may have discussed this, Annika. While O'Reilly was specifically referring to reaction to George Zimmerman case, a similar sentiment has been expressed throughout the political right in defense of the court's decision. It says, when Attorney General Eric Holder announced that the Justice Department would use available tools to continue enforcing 4B, Fox's Eric Bolling accused the nation's first black attorney general of thumbing his nose at the Supreme Court so he can widen the racial divide in America. Nina Easton, a Fortune columnist, said on Fox's special report that Holder's move was a part of an ongoing electoral strategy by this administration to gin up the black and Latino vote.
Yeah, it sounds like somebody's moving furniture.
And nobody is, though. I know. It really doesn't make sense to me. It's 2013 and my phone still sucks this much. Makes no sense to me, but that's a different topic. We hear this today with new voter ID reforms. They're just saying, I'm just protecting the integrity of the electoral process. So that echoes today.
The electoral process is a joke now. Who cares about the integrity of the electoral process? All process is F.
Yeah, and my opinion is from like a radical democratic point of view. I don't mean this in Democratic Party. I mean this as in a belief in democracy. I'm not saying we shouldn't vote. I'm not saying we shouldn't care. I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about it. But with the effing electoral college, there is no integrity.
No, not at all.
Not anymore, no.
I mean, but what do you mean not anymore? Because the Electoral College has always been there,
That we've outgrown that.
I think it was a travesty intended to keep the upper classes always and the political elites always in control of the voting process. I think from the beginning it was rotten.
Yeah, I think so too.
Well, I think it had a purpose to keep the political elite in control, but that's not what we're talking about. So, perhaps most provocatively, Rush Limbaugh told his audience that Democrats only oppose voter ID laws because they would have a very negative impact on cheating. Annika, me and you have talked about Rush Limbaugh probably more than is necessary, and his arguments are not always the most articulate or well thought out, but that's just par for the course. And then finally,
I strongly agree with that.
the last part that, your good friend Rush Limbaugh that we always...
Oh, yes. Nobody buddy, because I met him once.
I would say it still is key. I think it can be improved, but I think, well, now it's gone. So, I mean, we're talking about something that's dead. But I think it has flaws, but I think it still is key. I think. We already discussed that. Blah, blah, blah. Trying to... We already talked about that, too. Oh, good. You guys already you hit all my final questions. It's good. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, okay. Yes, this is what I want to say. So, I think who was it, Rush Limbaugh or some right-wing critic of the Democrats said that they're trying to gin up minority votes with this opposition. My response to that is, don't Democrats already have the minority vote statistically?
I think they do. I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
Democrats are pretty good with the minorities, and at this point it's the Republicans that need to work on it.
The second to finally, do you agree with the author of this editorial that these arguments are the same that they were 40 years ago?
Yes, I think we have different arguments now.
No, well, I agree that they are the same because I feel like it's all about attitude. And people's, there's still a segment of society whose attitudes are negative toward minority people.
I think the motive may be the same, but the arguments have changed. And that's where I think this editorial is missing the point.
Right.
So does anyone want to say anything else about that, the motive or issues related to that?
No, I think we've really covered this quite well.
I think we have. Yeah.
I appreciate you allowing me to participate because really I've always feel like I don't know a lot of things about stuff, but I have opinions, but I just appreciate being included.
Well, I love
we've had some
having you here.
Interesting panelists of late.
Yeah, I think this discussion was one of the best. Obviously, I devoted a lot of time to this because I think it's important. I think there's a large historical context that a lot of people miss. So I thank you guys for hanging in there with me, and I thank the listeners. And I hope that Charlotte, you would be willing to come on again if you enjoyed
I would
it.
love to.
So again, Charlotte, student from UMBC, calling in from Severna Park, Maryland, and the Word regular contributor from Florida, Annika Wolf. Thank you both for being on the program today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Did you check your UMBC emails? I think I copied you the note that I wrote to them.
Oh, what did you say?
I don't know. I have to really read it. And they wrote me back and said, I don't understand what you're saying.
Wake up. Why is she not awake?
Oh, I just saw the little link on here. I could have read the bill.
Hey, I'm going to get off here in just 1 second. I'm just trying to make a call because I have to do it for the show. But I'll be off in... Okay. Oh, okay. I don't know what's going on.
The First Amendment is that we have freedom of speech, right?
Yeah.
All right, I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Bye.
I'm going home.